In the sterile corridors of Sunrise Memory Care, a 78-year-old woman was about to challenge everything her family believed about her failing mind. What started as a routine admission took a shocking turn when she came face-to-face with systematic financial abuse. Dolores "Dolly" Martinez wasn't your typical memory care patient. For 3 decades, she had built a catering empire, known for razor-sharp business instincts. When she encountered Administrator Janet Pierce's predatory charm, she had no idea she was walking into embezzlement targeting vulnerable residents. Dolly's decision to investigate while hiding her true mental acuity would lead to dangerous consequences. What began as family desperation would become an underground investigation exposing institutional corruption. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The East Texas heat pressed against the windows of Miguel's pickup truck like a living thing, heavy and persistent. Dolly Martinez sat in the passenger seat, her weathered hands folded in her lap, watching the familiar landscape give way to something foreign and final. The Sunrise Memory Care facility emerged from the pine trees like a mirage, all warm brick and welcoming porches, designed to look like anything but what it was. "Mija, you sure this is what you want?" Miguel's voice carried the weight of sleepless nights, though they both knew the decision had been made weeks ago, when the foreclosure notice arrived. Dolly turned to study her son's profile. 52 years old, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent creases. 2 jobs weren't enough anymore. The construction work that had sustained their family for decades had dried up after the pandemic, leaving Miguel scrambling for shifts that barely covered the mortgage on the house where 3 generations of Martinez women had lived and died. "What I want," Dolly said carefully, "is for you to stop carrying the world on your shoulders." Rosa climbed out of her sedan in the parking lot, her movements quick and efficient. Always the mediator, always trying to smooth the rough edges of family crisis, with her high school counselor's toolkit of gentle optimism. She approached Miguel's truck with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning, Mama," Rosa said, helping Dolly from the passenger seat. "You look beautiful today." Dolly had chosen her outfit deliberately, the navy blue dress with small white flowers that Eduardo had loved, paired with the pearl earrings Rosa had given her for her 70th birthday. If she was going to be evaluated, cataloged, and filed away, she would do it with dignity. The facility's lobby embraced them with manufactured warmth, soft lighting, comfortable chairs arranged in conversational clusters, and the faint scent of vanilla air freshener masking something more clinical underneath. Dolly's instincts, honed by decades of reading customers' moods at quinceañeras and wedding receptions, immediately cataloged the subtle hierarchies at play. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly when she saw Dolly's walker, then brightened with professional cheerfulness. The maintenance worker paused in his floor polishing to nod respectfully, but his eyes held the particular sadness reserved for new arrivals. Most telling was the way the nurses moved, purposeful but guarded, as if they'd learned to measure their emotional investment. "Mrs. Martinez, welcome to Sunrise." The woman approaching them radiated the kind of polished confidence that came from pharmaceutical sales training. Janet Pierce, according to her name tag, administrator. Her handshake was firm, her smile perfectly calibrated, and something in her eyes made Dolly think of the coyotes that sometimes wandered into her backyard. Beautiful, intelligent, and utterly without mercy. "I'm so pleased to meet you," Janet continued, her voice carrying just enough warmth to seem genuine. "I know this transition can feel overwhelming, but I want you to know you're joining a family here." While Miguel and Rosa were led to an office to complete paperwork, Dolly found herself subjected to Janet's practice tour. The dining room with its round tables and cheerful artwork. The activities room where residents sat in wheelchair-accessible circles, some alert and engaged, others staring into distances only they could see. The garden courtyard where a woman in a floral housecoat fed breadcrumbs to sparrows with the concentration of someone performing a sacred ritual. "We believe in maintaining our residents' sense of purpose and dignity," Janet explained, her hand resting briefly on Dolly's shoulder with presumptuous familiarity. "Our activity coordinators work with each resident to identify their interests and abilities." Dolly nodded appropriately, letting Janet see what she expected. A sweet elderly woman, perhaps a bit confused, certainly grateful for professional care. But behind her mild expression, Dolly was memorizing details. The way Janet's eyes lingered on the jewelry worn by residents during family visits. The slight impatience that flickered across her face when an elderly man asked about his missing watch. The casual dismissal in her voice when she mentioned residents' confusion about their personal belongings. Room 247 was pleasant enough. 2 beds, 2 dressers, a shared bathroom, and a window that looked out onto the courtyard. The woman in the bed nearest the window didn't look up from her book when they entered, but Dolly caught the slight shift in her posture that indicated active listening. "Mrs. Martinez, I'd like you to meet Ruby Washington, your roommate," Janet said, her voice taking on the artificially bright tone people used with children and the elderly. "Ruby, this is Dolly Martinez. I'm sure you two will get along wonderfully." Ruby Washington finally looked up, and Dolly immediately recognized a kindred spirit. The woman's eyes were sharp with intelligence, her gaze direct and assessing. She was older than Dolly, probably in her mid-80s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of bearing that suggested she'd spent decades commanding classrooms. "Pleasure to meet you, Dolly," Ruby said, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who'd learned to make every word count. "I hope you'll find it comfortable here." The pleasantries continued for a few more minutes before Janet excused herself to check on the paperwork. The moment her footsteps faded down the hallway, Ruby's demeanor shifted subtly. "First time in a place like this?" she asked, closing her book, a biography of Fannie Lou Hamer that Dolly noted with interest. "Yes," Dolly replied, settling into the chair beside Ruby's bed. "You?" "Been here 8 months. Took a fall at home, and my daughter decided I needed supervision." Ruby's tone suggested she had opinions about her daughter's decision. "What's your story?" Dolly found herself weighing her response. The official story was simple enough: early dementia, family unable to provide adequate care, everyone doing their best in a difficult situation. But something in Ruby's direct gaze invited honesty. "My son thinks I'm losing my mind," Dolly said carefully. "Maybe I am some days, but not today." Ruby's smile was the first genuine expression Dolly had seen since arriving. "Good. The ones who pretend everything is fine are the ones you have to worry about." Through the window, Dolly could see Miguel and Rosa in the parking lot, their conversation animated and tense. Miguel's gestures were sharp with frustration, while Rosa's body language screamed guilt and defensiveness. They were discussing money. Dolly could tell from the way Miguel kept glancing back at the facility, as if calculating its monthly cost against his dwindling resources. If only they knew about the coffee cans buried beneath the rose bushes in the backyard, the mason jars wrapped in plastic and hidden behind the furnace, the small fortune accumulated over 30 years of catering quinceañeras, wedding receptions, and community celebrations, payments in cash that she'd never reported, never deposited, never trusted to institutions that had historically viewed people like her as second-class citizens. $340,000. She could see every hiding place as clearly as if she were standing in her kitchen, could remember the exact feel of each bundle of bills, wrapped in plastic and secured with rubber bands. Enough to save Miguel's house, pay for her own care, and leave something for her grandchildren's education. But first, she needed to understand the dynamics of this place. The way Ruby watched Janet with thinly veiled suspicion suggested there were undercurrents worth investigating. The nervous energy of the nursing staff, the way residents seemed to guard their personal belongings, the subtle signs of financial irregularities that her decades of running a cash business had taught her to recognize. "Ruby," Dolly said, watching a maintenance worker wheel a cart past their window, "what do you know about the administration here?" Ruby's book closed with a soft thud. "What makes you ask?" "Just curious about the people who'll be taking care of us." "Taking care of us," Ruby repeated, her voice carrying decades of experience with institutional euphemisms. "That's one way to put it." The lunch bell chimed, and Dolly felt a moment of genuine confusion. Had they been talking for hours? The disorientation was real and frightening, a reminder that her cognitive challenges weren't entirely performative. But the memory of her hidden money remained crystal clear, as vivid and detailed as if she'd counted it yesterday. "Come on," Ruby said, reaching for her walker. "Let's go see what passes for food around here. And Dolly, keep your eyes open. This place isn't what it appears to be." As they made their way toward the dining room, Dolly caught sight of Miguel and Rosa through the lobby windows. They were embracing now, the argument apparently resolved, but Miguel's face carried the weight of a man who'd run out of options. Rosa's expression was carefully composed, but Dolly recognized the signs of her daughter's guilt. The way she fidgeted with her car keys, the forced brightness of her smile. They would visit regularly, she knew. They would bring flowers and pictures and updates about the grandchildren. They would tell themselves they were doing the right thing, the only thing possible under the circumstances. And maybe they were, but they had also unknowingly separated her from the resources that could solve all their problems. The irony wasn't lost on her. Placed in memory care just as she needed to remember most clearly where she'd hidden her life savings. The dining room buzzed with the controlled chaos of institutional meal service. Residents sat at assigned tables, some chatting quietly, others staring at their food with the distant expressions of people whose minds were elsewhere. Dolly noted the way the staff moved efficiently between tables, the careful choreography of medication distribution, the subtle monitoring of who ate what and how much. Mrs. Martinez? A young Asian woman in scrubs approached their table. "I'm Patricia Kim, but everyone calls me Patty. I'll be one of your nurses." Patty's smile was different from Janet's, warmer, more genuine, but also more guarded. There was something in her eyes that reminded Dolly of her own children when they were hiding something they weren't quite ready to reveal. "Nice to meet you, Patty," Dolly said, noting the way the young woman's gaze lingered on the residents around them, as if she were cataloging concerns she couldn't voice. As they settled into the rhythm of institutional life, Dolly began to understand the complex ecosystem of Sunrise Memory Care. There were the residents, of course, each carrying their own stories of loss and adaptation. There was the staff, from the genuinely caring nurses like Patty to the more cynical orderlies who treated their charges like inconvenient children. And there was the administration, represented by Janet Pierce's polished efficiency and corporate smile. But underneath it all, Dolly sensed something else, a current of unease that went beyond the normal difficulties of aging and care. Ruby's watchful silence, Patty's nervous energy, the way certain residents seemed to guard their personal belongings with particular vigilance. The afternoon stretched on with activities designed to maintain cognitive function and social engagement. Dolly participated dutifully, letting others see mild confusion when asked to remember recent events, but displaying enough competence to avoid being labeled as severely impaired. It was a delicate balance, appearing vulnerable enough to justify her placement here while maintaining enough credibility to eventually be believed when she needed to act. As evening approached and visiting hours ended, Dolly found herself alone with Ruby in their shared room. The older woman was reading again, but Dolly could feel her attention. "Ruby," Dolly said carefully, "you mentioned I should keep my eyes open. What exactly should I be looking for?" Ruby marked her place in her book and set it aside. "How much do you know about your family's financial situation?" "Enough to know why I'm here." "And how much do you know about financial abuse of the elderly?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Dolly felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in her mind. Janet's predatory confidence, the staff's nervous energy, the residents' defensive postures around their belongings. "I know it happens," Dolly said slowly. "I know vulnerable people get taken advantage of. What if I told you it might be happening right here?" Outside their window, the East Texas evening was settling into its familiar rhythm. Cicadas singing in the pine trees, the distant sound of traffic on the highway, the soft murmur of staff completing their shift changes. It was the kind of peaceful scene that made it easy to forget that predators often chose the most innocent-looking hunting grounds. "I'd ask what you've seen," Dolly replied, "and I'd ask what you think we should do about it." Ruby's smile was sharp with approval. "I think, Dolly Martinez, that you and I are going to get along just fine." As the night deepened and the facility settled into its evening routine, Dolly lay in her narrow bed and thought about the hidden money that could solve her family's problems. Somewhere in the darkness, Miguel was probably lying awake calculating mortgage payments and construction schedules. Rosa was likely organizing her guilt into manageable compartments, the way she organized everything else in her carefully controlled life. They had no idea that their solution was buried in mason jars and coffee cans, hidden by a woman they thought was losing her mind. But before she could retrieve her fortune, she needed to understand the dangers of this place. Ruby's suspicions, Patty's nervous energy, Janet's predatory smile, they were all pieces of a puzzle that could affect not just her own fate, but the safety of every vulnerable person in this facility. The memory care unit settled into its nighttime quiet, but Dolly Martinez remained alert, her mind sharp with purpose. She had been underestimated before, by customers who thought an elderly Mexican woman couldn't run a successful business, by bureaucrats who assumed she couldn't navigate complex regulations, by family members who confused momentary confusion with permanent incapacity. She had spent 78 years proving them wrong. Tonight, she would begin proving them wrong again. The morning brought an unexpected gift in the form of Charlie Martinez, arriving with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder and a thermos of coffee that smelled like home. Dolly's heart lifted at the sight of her youngest grandson, whose patient smile and gentle manner had always made him her favorite confidant. "Buenos dias, abuela," Charlie said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "I brought some pictures from Cousin Maria's graduation party. Thought you might want to see them." Ruby, who had been reading in her usual spot by the window, looked up with interest. Charlie's presence represented something precious in this sterile environment, a bridge to the world outside, unmarked by the institutional dynamics that governed every other interaction. "You're sweet to visit," Dolly said, squeezing his hand, "but shouldn't you be at work?" "I'm between jobs right now," Charlie admitted, his voice carrying the slight embarrassment of a recent college graduate still finding his footing. "Dad's been stressed about money, so I'm helping out where I can." The laptop whirred to life, its screen displaying a desktop wallpaper of the Martinez family home, the same house where Dolly's carefully hidden fortune waited beneath rose bushes and behind furnace vents. Charlie began clicking through photos, narrating each image with the easy familiarity of someone who had documented every family gathering since receiving his first camera at age 12. "Here's Tia Rosa trying to dance salsa," he said, grinning at a photo of his aunt looking mortified as his uncle spun her awkwardly. "And here's Dad actually smiling for once." But as Charlie navigated the photo gallery, Dolly found herself studying his fingers on the keyboard, the way he moved effortlessly between applications, the casual competence with which he handled technology that seemed mysterious to most people her age. "Charlie," she said carefully, "could you show me how to do that?" "What, look at photos?" "Sure, it's easy." His fingers moved across the trackpad, demonstrating the gestures. "You just click and drag like this, or use these arrow keys to move between pictures." "No, I mean really show me. Let me try." Charlie's eyebrows rose slightly, but he shifted the laptop toward her. "Okay, abuela, put your finger here on the trackpad and gently slide it to the right." Dolly followed his instructions, surprised by how quickly she grasped the basic navigation. Within minutes, she was moving through the photo gallery with increasing confidence, her muscle memory adapting to the new interface faster than Charlie had expected. "Wow, you're a natural," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "Most people your age take weeks to get comfortable with this stuff." "Maybe I'm not as old as everyone thinks," Dolly replied, clicking through images of her family with growing fluency. "What else can this machine do?" For the next hour, Charlie provided an impromptu tutorial on basic computer functions: email, internet browsing, document creation, each new skill absorbed by his grandmother with an eagerness that both delighted and puzzled him. Ruby watched the lesson with growing interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own sharp intellect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You know, abuela," Charlie said as he prepared to leave, "if you want to stay in touch more easily, I could set up an email account for you. The facility has internet access." "I'd like that," Dolly said. "And Charlie, could you do me a favor?" "Of course. Could you look up some information about this place, Sunrise Memory Care? Just general information. Reviews, that sort of thing." Charlie's expression grew thoughtful. "Is everything okay here? You seem different, more alert than when we brought you in." "I'm fine, Mijo. Just curious about my new home." After Charlie left, Ruby wheeled her chair closer to Dolly's bed. "That was interesting. Your grandson doesn't know about your business background, does he? He knows I cooked for parties. He doesn't know about the money management, the negotiations with vendors, the complex scheduling required to run multiple events simultaneously." Dolly's voice carried a note of regret. I let my family see what they expected to see. An old woman who cooked traditional food. The same way you're letting the staff here see what they expect to see. Exactly. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. Through their partially open door, they could see Eleanor's daughter standing outside Janet Pierce's office, her voice raised in frustration. I don't care what your records show, the woman was saying. I know my mother's account history, and there are charges here that make no sense. Janet's response was too quiet to hear, but her body language radiated professional calm. She gestured for Eleanor's daughter to enter her office, closing the door behind them with a soft click. Come on, Ruby whispered, reaching for her walker. Let's take a walk. They made their way slowly down the hallway, Ruby's mobility limitations providing perfect cover for their eavesdropping. The office door was solid, but the ventilation system carried sound better than Janet probably realized. Understand your confusion, but I can assure you that all charges are legitimate, Janet was saying. Your mother's care plan includes several specialized services that aren't immediately obvious to family members. A $400 charge for therapeutic consultation last Tuesday? What kind of consultation? Sometimes residents require additional psychological support to help them adjust to their new environment. We bring in specialists as needed. I was here last Tuesday. My mother spent the entire afternoon doing puzzles and watching television. When exactly did this consultation occur? There was a pause, and Dolly could almost hear Janet's mental calculations. The consultation was conducted during evening hours, when visiting is typically limited. Your mother was experiencing some agitation about her finances, and we felt professional intervention was necessary. Ruby's grip tightened on her walker. They both knew Eleanor had spent Tuesday evening in the common room, playing cards with other residents. There had been no consultation, no agitation, no specialized intervention of any kind. I want to speak with this consultant, Eleanor's daughter said. I want documentation of exactly what services were provided. I'm afraid that's not possible. Patient confidentiality prevents us from sharing specific therapeutic details, even with family members. What I can tell you is that your mother's well-being is our primary concern, and all services are provided only when medically necessary. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but the pattern was clear. Janet had an explanation for every discrepancy, a justification for every questionable charge. But her explanations were carefully crafted to be unverifiable, relying on medical privacy laws and the assumption that family members wouldn't understand the complexities of institutional care. When Eleanor's daughter finally emerged from the office, her face was flushed with frustration and defeat. She walked past Dolly and Ruby without acknowledgement, her shoulders set in the defeated posture of someone who had been expertly gaslit. Therapeutic consultation, Ruby muttered as they made their way back to their room. $400 for something that never happened. And she'll get away with it, Dolly said, because who's going to believe Eleanor? A woman with dementia claiming her daughter's wrong about the bills? That afternoon, while most residents were napping or watching television, Dolly and Ruby found themselves in the common room with Eleanor herself. The older woman was agitated, clearly distressed by her daughter's visit. She thinks I'm losing my mind, Eleanor whispered. Maybe I am. But I know what I know about money. I balanced my own checkbook for 60 years. Eleanor, Dolly said gently, tell us exactly what you remember about your account. I had $43,000 when I arrived here 8 months ago. My pension comes in every month, $2,200. Social Security is another $1,800. But when my daughter showed me the statements today, there was less than $30,000 left. Ruby's eyes sharpened. That's $13,000 in 8 months. Plus your monthly income of $4,000, Dolly added. You should have had more money than when you arrived, not less. Eleanor's face crumpled. But the bills. Janet showed my daughter all these charges, medical supplies, therapy sessions, transportation costs. It all looked official. Official doesn't mean legitimate, Ruby said firmly. Did you receive all those services? I don't know, maybe. I get confused sometimes, and the days run together. But $400 for one conversation? That seems like a lot. That evening, as the facility settled into its nighttime routine, Dolly made a decision that would change everything. She found Ruby in their room, reading by the soft light of her bedside lamp. "Ruby," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. About why I'm really here." Ruby closed her book and gave Dolly her full attention. "I'm listening. My family thinks I'm losing my mind, and maybe I am some days, but I'm not helpless. And I'm not poor." Dolly's voice carried the weight of decades of carefully guarded secrets. "I have money. A lot of money. Hidden at home." "How much money?" $340,000. Cash, saved from my catering business over 30 years. Ruby's expression didn't change, but Dolly saw the quick calculations in her eyes. "And your family doesn't know? They know I ran a successful business, but they think it was just enough to get by. They don't know about the cash payments, the money I never reported, the fortune I've been accumulating to take care of them. So why are you here if you could afford private care? Because my son is about to lose his house, and I can't get to the money while I'm locked up in this place. And because—" Dolly's voice hardened. "I think Janet Pierce is stealing from vulnerable people like Eleanor, and someone needs to stop her." Ruby was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. "You're talking about taking on the entire administrative structure of this facility. Janet has lawyers, corporate backing, institutional protection. We're just two old women who everyone thinks are losing their minds." "Exactly," Dolly said. "Which means we're the perfect people to investigate her. Who would suspect us? What are you proposing? That we document everything. Every suspicious charge, every unexplained discrepancy, every resident who's been victimized. And then we find a way to expose her before she steals from anyone else." Ruby's smile was slow and dangerous. "You know what you're asking? This isn't just about your family's money anymore. This is about taking down a criminal enterprise that's been operating under the cover of elder care. I know exactly what I'm asking." "Then let's do it." Outside their window, the East Texas night hummed with the sounds of a world that had moved on without them. But inside room 247, two women who had been written off as confused and dependent were forming an alliance that would prove more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The memory care unit slept peacefully, unaware that its newest resident had just declared war on the very system that was supposed to protect her. And somewhere in the administrative offices, Janet Pierce was reviewing financial records, confident in her position and completely unaware that her perfect crime was about to be exposed by the most unlikely investigators of all. The morning brought an unexpected opportunity in the form of Nurse Patricia Kim's obvious distress. Dolly had been observing the young woman's behavior patterns for days, noting the way her hands trembled slightly when distributing certain medications, the nervous energy that seemed to intensify whenever Janet Pierce appeared, and the careful way she documented everything in her patient charts. "Mrs. Martinez, how are you feeling today?" Patty asked during the morning medication rounds, but her voice carried an undertone of something deeper than professional concern. "A little confused," Dolly replied, letting her voice waver slightly. "Sometimes I forget where I am, and I start to worry about things that probably don't matter anymore." Patty's expression softened with genuine empathy. "What kinds of things worry you?" It was a calculated moment of vulnerability, designed to test the waters of trust. "Money," Dolly said simply. "I know it's silly, but I keep thinking about my bank account, wondering if someone's taking care of it properly." The effect was immediate and telling. Patty's entire demeanor shifted, her professional composure cracking slightly to reveal something that looked like guilt mixed with recognition. "That's not silly at all," Patty said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's natural to worry about your finances. Have you noticed any problems with your account statements?" "I don't know," Dolly replied honestly. "My daughter handles all that now. But sometimes I wonder if she really understands what to look for." Patty glanced around the room, then moved closer to Dolly's bed. "Mrs. Martinez, if you ever have specific concerns about your accounts, you should definitely discuss them with your family. It's important to stay involved in your own financial decisions as much as possible." The words were carefully chosen, professional enough to avoid direct accusation but loaded with implication. Dolly recognized the language of someone who wanted to warn but couldn't afford to be explicit. "Patty, she said gently. "You seem like you care about what happens to us here. That's not always easy to find." The young nurse's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. "I became a nurse to help people. Sometimes that's harder than it should be." Before Dolly could respond, Janet Pierce's voice carried down the hallway, calling for Patty to join her in the administrative offices. The moment of connection was broken, but the foundation had been laid. That afternoon, while most residents were participating in group activities, Dolly staged her first deliberate performance. She approached the nurse's station with a look of mild confusion, clutching a tissue and speaking in the wavering voice of someone fighting cognitive decline. "Excuse me," she said to Patty, who was alone at the desk. "I'm having trouble remembering. Did my daughter say something about my account? I thought she mentioned some charges she didn't understand." Patty's reaction was immediate and revealing. She looked around quickly, then leaned closer to Dolly. "What kind of charges?" "I don't know. Something about therapy, but I don't remember having any therapy." Dolly let her voice trail off, as if the effort of remembering was exhausting. "Mrs. Martinez," Patty said carefully, "sometimes families don't understand all the different types of services that get billed. But if you're concerned about specific charges, you have the right to ask questions. Even if my memory isn't what it used to be? Especially then." Patty's voice carried a fierce protectiveness that confirmed Dolly's assessment. "Your cognitive status doesn't affect your right to understand your own finances." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps in the hallway, and Patty immediately returned to her professional demeanor. But the exchange had served its purpose. Dolly now knew that her suspicions about financial irregularities were shared by at least one staff member who was positioned to observe the facility's operations from the inside. That evening, Father Luis Moreno arrived for his regular visit, bringing with him the familiar scent of aftershave and the quiet authority that had made him the Martinez family's spiritual advisor for over 15 years. His presence in the common room immediately drew residents who found comfort in his gentle manner and patient listening. "Doña Dolly," he said, settling into the chair beside her with the easy familiarity of an old friend. "How are you adjusting to your new home?" "It's different, Padre," she replied, letting some of her genuine uncertainty show. "Sometimes I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself." Father Luis nodded with understanding. "Change is difficult at any age. But remember, you are still the same strong woman who built a successful business and raised 3 children. That doesn't disappear because your address has changed." His words carried more weight than he probably realized. In the context of her current situation, they felt like a reminder that her core competencies remained intact, even if others couldn't see them. "Padre," she said carefully, "can I ask you something? About Miguel and the family?" "Of course. Are they going to be okay? Financially, I mean. Miguel tries to hide it, but I can see the worry in his eyes." Father Luis's expression grew troubled. "Your son is a proud man, Dolly. He's struggling, but he won't accept help. The construction work has been sporadic, and the mortgage payments are becoming difficult to manage." "How difficult?" "He's received foreclosure warnings. He's been talking about selling the house, maybe moving to a smaller place. He feels terrible about it, especially knowing it's the home where you raised your family." Dolly's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. The house contained more than just memories. It contained the solution to all their problems, buried in locations that only she knew. "Padre," she said quietly, "what if I told you that the family's financial problems could be solved? That there's money available, but they don't know about it?" Father Luis leaned forward, his expression concerned. "What do you mean, Dolly?" "I mean that sometimes people keep secrets to protect their families, and sometimes those secrets become more important than the reasons for keeping them." "Are you saying you have money saved?" "I'm saying that 30 years of running a cash business allowed me to accumulate resources that my family doesn't know about. Significant resources." Father Luis was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words against his understanding of her current cognitive state. "Dolly, I need you to be very clear with me. Are you saying you have hidden money?" $340,000, she said simply, hidden in various locations around the house. The priest's eyes widened. "Dolly, that's a fortune. Why didn't you tell your family? Because I didn't trust banks. And I didn't want them to worry about taxes or regulations or any of the complications that come with that kind of money. I was saving it for emergencies, for their futures. Her voice grew stronger. Well, this is an emergency. But if you have that much money, why are you here? Why not use it for private care? Because they don't know about it. And even if they did, they might not believe me. Would you believe an elderly woman with dementia who claimed to have a fortune buried in her backyard? Father Luis was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications. Dolly, this is a very serious claim. If what you're saying is true, it changes everything. I know it's hard to believe, but I need you to trust me, Padre, and I need you to help me figure out how to tell my family without them thinking I've lost my mind completely. This is why you've been asking about Miguel's financial situation? This is why I need to get out of here, or at least find a way to communicate with them about the money's locations. But there's something else, something that makes the timing even more critical. What? Dolly glanced around the common room, ensuring they weren't being overheard. I think the administrator here is stealing from residents. And I think she's targeting people whose families aren't closely monitoring their finances. Father Luis's expression grew grave. That's a very serious accusation, Dolly. I know, but I've seen enough in my years of business to recognize financial manipulation when I see it. And I've talked to other residents who've experienced unexplained account discrepancies. What do you want me to do? I want you to talk to Miguel and Rosa, not about the money, not yet, but about the possibility that I'm more aware of my situation than they realize, and I want you to help them understand that some things are more important than pride. Father Luis nodded slowly. I can do that, but Dolly, if you're right about the administrator, you could be putting yourself in danger by investigating. I'm already in danger, Padre. We all are. The difference is that I'm in a position to do something about it. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charlie, who had come for an evening visit with his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. The young man's presence immediately brightened the atmosphere, and Father Luis greeted him with the warmth of someone who had watched him grow up. Charlie, how's the job search going? Father Luis asked. Still looking, but I'm keeping busy, Charlie replied, settling into a chair near his grandmother. I've been doing some research projects to stay sharp. Research projects? Dolly asked with interest. Just looking into various things online. Local businesses, community organizations, that sort of thing. Charlie's tone was casual, but Dolly caught the slight emphasis on his words. Did you find anything interesting? Some things. I found out that Sunrise Memory Care is owned by a larger corporation called Sunshine Healthcare Solutions. They operate about 20 facilities across Texas and Oklahoma. Father Luis looked interested. That's quite a network. Yeah, and they've had some interesting reviews. Nothing actionable, but there are patterns in the complaints. Families mentioning unexpected charges, residents losing personal belongings, staff turnover issues. Dolly felt a surge of excitement. Charlie had taken her request for information seriously and had uncovered exactly the kind of context she needed. Charlie, she said carefully, do you think you could help me set up that email account you mentioned? I'd like to stay in better touch with the family. Sure, Abuela. I brought my laptop specifically for that. As Charlie began the process of creating her email account, Dolly found herself impressed by his thoroughness. He didn't just set up basic access. He showed her how to navigate different websites, how to search for information, how to save and organize documents. This is the internet browser, he explained, demonstrating with practiced ease. You can search for anything you want to know about. Just type your question here, and it will find relevant information. Anything? Within reason. News articles, business information, reviews, public records. Most information is available if you know how to look for it. Father Luis watched the tutorial with interest. Technology has certainly changed how we access information. It's democratized research, Charlie agreed. Anyone can investigate almost anything now, as long as they have internet access and know what to look for. The implications weren't lost on Dolly. With Charlie's help, she now had access to the same tools that professional investigators used. She could research Janet Pierce's background, investigate Sunshine Healthcare Solutions, and document patterns of abuse across multiple facilities. After Charlie left, Father Luis lingered for a private conversation with Dolly. "I'm going to talk to Miguel and Rosa," he said, "but I need you to promise me something. If you're right about the administrator, if she really is stealing from residents, you need to be very careful. People who commit financial crimes against vulnerable populations can be dangerous when cornered." "I understand the risks, Padre." "Do you?" "Because what you're describing isn't just petty theft. If this woman is systematically embezzling from multiple residents across multiple facilities, she's operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise. People don't build operations like that without being willing to protect them." Dolly met his gaze steadily. "Then we need to stop her before she hurts anyone else." Father Luis sighed. "You're as stubborn as your mother was." "Good. I'm going to need to be." As the evening wound down and the facility settled into its nighttime routine, Dolly found herself reviewing the day's progress with Ruby. They had successfully begun building a network of allies, Patty Kim as their inside source, Father Luis as their bridge to the family, and Charlie as their technological resource. "We're making progress," Ruby observed, "but we're also escalating the situation. If Janet Pierce is as dangerous as we think, we need to be prepared for retaliation." "What kind of retaliation?" "Increased medication to make us more compliant, transfer to more restrictive facilities, restrictions on family visits. There are many ways to isolate residents who become troublesome." Dolly nodded grimly. "Then we need to work fast. And we need to be smart about it. My civil rights experience taught me that documentation is everything. We need proof, not just suspicions. Charlie's research is a start, and Patty's observations from inside the system. But we need more. We need financial records, evidence of the actual theft, testimony from multiple victims." Ruby's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades building legal cases against institutional oppression. "How do we get that without raising suspicion?" "Very carefully, and with help from people who understand both the system and the technology." As they prepared for bed, Dolly reflected on the complex web of relationships they were building. Each ally brought specific strengths: Patty's inside knowledge, Father Luis's moral authority, Charlie's technological skills, Ruby's tactical experience. Together, they formed a coalition that could challenge Janet Pierce's criminal enterprise. But they also represented a significant threat to someone who had built her career on exploiting vulnerable people. The next phase of their investigation would require careful planning and absolute discretion. Outside their window, the East Texas night settled into its familiar rhythm. But inside room 247, two women who had been written off as confused and dependent were orchestrating a sophisticated operation that would test every skill they had developed over their long and eventful lives. The memory care unit slept peacefully, unaware that its newest resident had just assembled an unlikely but formidable team of allies. And somewhere in the administrative offices, Janet Pierce was reviewing financial records, still confident in her position and completely unaware that her perfect crime was about to be exposed by the most dangerous combination of all: experienced investigators who had nothing left to lose. The opportunity came during Janet Pierce's predictable lunch routine. For 3 weeks, Dolly had observed the administrator's schedule with the precision of someone who had once coordinated multiple catering events simultaneously. Every day at 12:15, Janet left her office for exactly 45 minutes, always locking the door, but never considering that Ruby Washington's decades of civil rights activism had included more than peaceful protests. "Patty's creating the distraction now," Ruby whispered, positioning her walker near the administrative hallway. Through the window, they could see the young nurse frantically calling for assistance with Mr. Henderson, who had suddenly become agitated about his missing reading glasses, glasses that Ruby had carefully relocated to the laundry room 20 minutes earlier. Dolly moved with surprising speed for someone supposedly suffering from dementia, her fingers working the simple lockpick that Ruby had fashioned from a hairpin and a paperclip. The door clicked open just as Janet's laughter echoed from the dining room, where she was charming a family of prospective residents. 2 minutes, Ruby said, standing guard while Dolly slipped inside. The office was a study in corporate efficiency. Clean desk, organized filing cabinets, and a computer screen that Janet had left unlocked in her haste to deal with the Henderson situation. Dolly's business experience kicked in immediately, her eyes scanning for the kind of financial irregularities she'd learned to spot during her catering career. The open spreadsheet on the screen was titled Resident Billing Adjustments and contained columns for resident names, service codes, and charge amounts. Eleanor Washington's name appeared multiple times, each entry representing hundreds of dollars in questionable charges. But it was the pattern that made Dolly's blood run cold, the same service codes appearing for multiple residents on the same dates, often for services that couldn't possibly have been provided simultaneously. She pulled out the small digital camera that Charlie had given her, supposedly for family photos, and quickly documented 3 screens worth of evidence. The photos would be blurry and amateur, but they would be proof. "Dolly, move," Ruby hissed from the doorway. The sound of approaching footsteps sent Dolly's heart racing, but her hands remained steady as she navigated to Janet's email program. The most recent messages revealed correspondence with other facility administrators, discussing revenue optimization strategies and managing family oversight. One email, sent just that morning, made her stomach turn. Henderson family asking questions about therapeutic consultation charges. Recommend standard response protocol and consider medication adjustment to reduce agitation. The footsteps were getting closer. Dolly quickly photographed the email, closed the programs, and moved toward the door. But as she reached for the handle, she heard Janet's voice in the hallway, closer than expected. "I'll just grab those files from my office," Janet was saying to someone. Ruby's walker suddenly clattered to the floor, followed by her voice calling out in apparent distress. "Help, I've fallen." The commotion drew Janet's attention, buying Dolly the precious seconds she needed to slip out the back of the office and into the adjacent supply closet. Through the thin walls, she heard Janet's sharp intake of breath as she discovered her office door slightly ajar. "How did this get unlocked?" Janet muttered, her voice carrying a new edge of suspicion. The change in Janet Pierce's behavior was immediate and chilling. Within hours of discovering her office door ajar, new security protocols appeared throughout the facility. Keycards were required for areas that had previously been accessible, computer terminals were locked down with additional passwords, and staff members were suddenly required to log their every movement. "She knows," Ruby whispered during their evening conversation, her voice barely audible above the hum of the facility's ventilation system. "Look at how she's watching us." Dolly had noticed it too. The way Janet's eyes lingered on them during meals, the casual questions about their daily activities, the sudden appearance of additional staff members who seemed more focused on observation than patient care. But what worried her most was the change in medication routines. "Mrs. Martinez," Patty said during the morning medication distribution, her voice tight with barely controlled anxiety, "there's been a change in your prescriptions. The doctor has added something to help with your agitation." Dolly looked at the small white pill that hadn't been part of her regimen the day before. "What kind of agitation?" "I feel fine." "Sometimes residents don't recognize their own symptoms," Patty replied, but her eyes were pleading. "Please, just take it. It's important that you stay calm." The message was clear. Janet was escalating her control measures, using medication to ensure compliance from residents who might be causing problems. Dolly palmed the pill instead of swallowing it, a technique she'd learned during her own mother's final illness when similar medications had turned a sharp-minded woman into a compliant shadow. That afternoon, Father Luis arrived for what he described to the staff as a routine pastoral visit. But his conversation with Dolly carried urgent undertones. "I spoke with Miguel and Rosa," he said quietly, positioning himself so that his back blocked their conversation from the nurse's station. "They're coming tomorrow for a family meeting. I've prepared them for the possibility that you're more aware than they've realized." "What did you tell them?" "That sometimes people hide their competence to protect themselves, and that your concerns about this place might be worth investigating." Father Luis's voice carried the weight of someone who had spent the night wrestling with difficult truths. "Dolly, I also did some research of my own. Sunshine Healthcare Solutions has been the subject of several state investigations. Nothing proven, but patterns of complaints similar to what you've described. What kind of patterns? Unexplained financial discrepancies, residents being transferred to more restrictive facilities after families ask questions, staff members being terminated for reporting concerns to authorities. Father Luis paused, his expression grave. And in 2 cases, residents who were vocal about problems died unexpectedly from medication complications. The implications hung heavy between them. Janet Pierce wasn't just stealing money. She was running a systematic operation that silenced opposition through intimidation, isolation, and potentially worse. "Padre," Dolly said carefully, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to my house with Miguel. Tell him to look behind the furnace in the basement. There's a loose brick in the wall. Behind it, he'll find a mason jar with instructions for finding the rest of the money. You're sure about this?" "I'm sure that if something happens to me, my family needs to know where to find their inheritance. And I'm sure that we're running out of time." The family meeting took place in the same conference room where Dolly had observed Janet's expert manipulation of Eleanor's daughter. But this time, the dynamics were different. Miguel and Rosa entered with the defensive postures of people who had been told their assumptions might be wrong, while Janet radiated the controlled tension of someone whose authority was being questioned. "I understand you have concerns about your mother's care," Janet began, her smile as practiced as ever. "I want to assure you that Dolly is receiving excellent treatment, though she has been showing some signs of increased agitation lately." "What kind of agitation?" Rosa asked, her counselor's training evident in her careful phrasing. "She's been asking repetitive questions about finances, expressing paranoid thoughts about staff members, and becoming fixated on conspiracy theories about the facility's operations." Janet's tone was professional but dismissive. "These are unfortunately common symptoms as dementia progresses." Miguel leaned forward, his construction worker hands clasped tightly. "Our mother has always been sharp about money. If she's asking questions, maybe we should listen." "Of course family input is valuable," Janet replied smoothly. "But you have to understand that cognitive decline can manifest as seemingly rational concerns about imaginary problems. Dolly may seem lucid when she discusses these fears, but that doesn't make them grounded in reality." "I'd like to hear what she has to say," Rosa said firmly. When Dolly was brought into the room, she could see the uncertainty in her children's faces. They were looking for signs of the mother they remembered, trying to reconcile Father Luis's warnings with their own observations of her decline. "Miguel, Rosa," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not as confused as everyone thinks. I have been observing this facility, and I have documented evidence of financial crimes being committed against residents." Janet's smile never wavered. "Dolly, we've discussed this. Sometimes our minds create patterns that aren't really there." "My mind created a successful business for 30 years, Dolly replied sharply. "It created the money that could save Miguel's house, if you knew where to look for it." Miguel's head snapped up. "What money?" "The money I've been saving since your father died. $340,000, hidden in the house you're about to lose to foreclosure." The room fell silent. Janet's professional composure cracked slightly, replaced by something harder and more calculating. "Mrs. Martinez," Janet said carefully, "these kinds of elaborate fantasies about hidden money are very common in dementia patients. It's a way the mind copes with feelings of powerlessness." But Rosa was studying her mother with new attention. "Mama, where is this money?" "Behind the furnace, under the rose bushes, in the old coffee cans in the garage. 30 years of cash payments from catering jobs, saved for emergencies." Dolly's voice grew stronger. "And this is an emergency." Miguel was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're serious." "I'm serious about the money. And I'm serious about the crimes being committed here. Janet Pierce has been systematically stealing from residents' accounts, and she's been drugging anyone who tries to expose her." Janet stood abruptly. "I think this meeting needs to end. Your mother is clearly experiencing a severe episode, and I'm going to recommend that we adjust her medication to help with these delusional thoughts." "No," Rosa said firmly. "We're not finished here." The confrontation that followed would determine not just Dolly's fate, but the safety of every vulnerable resident in the facility. Outside the conference room windows, the East Texas afternoon was peaceful and ordinary. But inside, a battle was beginning that would test every relationship, every assumption, and every ounce of courage that the Martinez family possessed. The tension in the conference room was palpable as Rosa pulled out her phone and began dialing. "David, I need you to come to Mama's memory care facility immediately. Bring your accounting software and your laptop." Her husband's financial expertise had always been a source of pride, but now it might be their salvation. Janet's mask of professional composure was beginning to slip. "Mrs. Chen, I really don't think involving outside parties is appropriate. Your mother's medical privacy. My mother is lucid enough to give consent," Rosa interrupted, her high school counselor's authority finally asserting itself. "And she's making specific, detailed claims that can be verified." Miguel was already heading for the door. "I'm going to the house. If Mama's right about the money, then maybe she's right about everything else." "Miguel, wait," Dolly called out. "Take Charlie with you. He knows about the locations. I've been preparing him." The admission that she'd been deliberately sharing information with her technologically savvy grandson caused another crack in Janet's composure. A confused dementia patient wouldn't be capable of such strategic planning. "Mrs. Martinez," Janet said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "I'm going to have to insist that you return to your room. This level of agitation is concerning, and I think a mild sedative would be appropriate." "No sedation," Rosa said firmly. "Not until we've had a chance to investigate her claims." As if summoned by the mounting crisis, Charlie appeared in the doorway, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, and his expression grim. "Abuela, I found something you need to see." He opened his laptop and navigated to a folder labeled Sunshine Healthcare Investigation. The screen filled with documented complaints, news articles, and regulatory filings that painted a disturbing picture of systematic abuse across multiple facilities. Janet Pierce was terminated from her previous position at Riverside Pharmaceuticals for falsifying expense reports, Charlie read from his notes. She was hired by Sunshine Healthcare, despite red flags in her background check. And there are patterns of financial irregularities at every facility where she's worked. Janet's face had gone pale. "This is harassment. I'm calling security." "Security won't help you," Ruby Washington said from the doorway, her walker tapping against the floor as she entered the room. "Not when the authorities are already on their way." Behind Ruby, Patty Kim appeared, her nursing uniform wrinkled and her expression determined. "I've been documenting everything for months," she said, producing a thick folder. "Medication irregularities, billing discrepancies, residents being silenced through chemical restraints. I was afraid to report it alone, but I'm not alone anymore." The room erupted into controlled chaos as the various threads of the investigation converged. Charlie's technical research, Ruby's strategic planning, Patty's inside documentation, and Dolly's sharp observations had created an overwhelming case against Janet's criminal enterprise. "The photos from your office computer," Dolly said to Janet, producing the small digital camera, "the emails about revenue optimization and managing family oversight. The systematic targeting of residents whose families aren't closely involved in their care." Janet's professional mask finally shattered completely. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than one facility, bigger than one administrator. Sunshine Healthcare has lawyers, corporate protection, regulatory connections. You're just a confused old woman and a bunch of bleeding hearts." "Maybe," Dolly replied calmly. "We're confused old women with documentation, witnesses, and family members who know how to fight for what's right." Miguel's voice came through Rosa's phone, crackling with excitement and disbelief. "There's a mason jar behind the furnace. It has a list of locations and, Jesus Christ, there are bundles of cash wrapped in plastic." "Mama, how much money is here? Count it," Dolly said simply. The sound of rustling paper and Miguel's whispered calculations filled the room. "This jar alone has over $20,000, and there are 8 more locations on this list." Rosa's expression transformed from skeptical concern to stunned recognition. "Mama, you've been planning this for years." "I've been planning for my family's security for 30 years, Dolly corrected, "and I've been planning to expose Janet Pierce for 3 weeks. David Chen arrived with his accounting software and immediately began analyzing the financial documents that Patty had compiled. His background in corporate finance made him the perfect person to identify the sophisticated billing schemes that Janet had been using. "This is systematic fraud," David announced after 20 minutes of analysis. "Duplicate billing, charges for non-existent services, systematic targeting of residents with limited family oversight. The total amount stolen appears to be in the hundreds of thousands across multiple residents." Janet made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Even if you can prove financial irregularities, you can't prove I was responsible. I'm an administrator, not a billing clerk." "Actually, we can," Charlie said, pulling up the email evidence on his laptop. "Your electronic signature is on all the fraudulent service authorizations. And the IP logs show that the billing adjustments were made from your office computer during times when only you had access." The sound of sirens in the distance signaled the arrival of law enforcement. Father Luis had followed through on his promise to contact the authorities, and the combined evidence from multiple sources had triggered a full investigation. "There's something else," Patty said quietly. "The medication protocols. Several residents who complained about financial irregularities were put on unnecessary sedatives: Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Henderson, Eleanor Washington. All of them became compliant after questioning billing discrepancies." "Chemical restraints," Ruby said grimly, used to silence inconvenient witnesses. As police officers entered the facility, followed by investigators from the Texas Department of Aging and Disability Services, Janet Pierce's criminal enterprise began to crumble. But the true revelation wasn't just the scope of her crimes. It was the demonstration that a carefully coordinated group of supposedly vulnerable people could take down a sophisticated criminal operation. "Abuela," Charlie said, his voice filled with admiration and surprise, "you've been playing chess while everyone else thought you were playing checkers." "I've been playing for my family's survival," Dolly replied, "and for the safety of every person in this facility who couldn't protect themselves." Outside the conference room windows, the East Texas afternoon was giving way to evening, but inside, the Martinez family was discovering that their assumptions about aging, competence, and vulnerability had been fundamentally challenged by a woman who had never stopped fighting for the people she loved. The memory care unit would never be the same, and neither would the family that had almost lost everything to pride, assumptions, and the systematic exploitation of society's most vulnerable members. The arrest of Janet Pierce sent shockwaves through the quiet corridors of Sunrise Memory Care. As investigators led her away in handcuffs, her corporate composure finally cracked completely, revealing the desperate criminal beneath the polished facade. "You have no idea what you've done," she spat at Dolly as they passed in the hallway. "This goes deeper than you think. You've made powerful enemies." But Dolly, surrounded by her family and allies, felt stronger than she had in months. "I've made the right choice. That's all that matters." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Detective Sarah Martinez, no relation to Dolly's family, arrived with a team of forensic accountants who immediately began auditing every resident's account. The scope of Janet's crimes became clear within hours. Preliminary estimates suggest over $400,000 stolen from residents across this facility alone, Detective Martinez announced during a meeting with affected families. "And we're finding evidence of similar schemes at 6 other Sunshine healthcare facilities." Eleanor Washington's daughter wept openly as she learned the extent of her mother's losses. $13,000. Gone. "And I thought she was imagining things." The psychological manipulation was as sophisticated as the financial fraud, Detective Martinez explained. Pierce used residents' cognitive impairments to discredit their complaints, while simultaneously using medication to ensure compliance from those who became too vocal. Ruby Washington, now recognized as one of the key investigators, addressed the gathering of families with the authority of someone who had spent decades fighting institutional oppression. "What happened here is a reminder that vulnerable doesn't mean powerless. When people work together, when they document evidence and demand accountability, even the most sophisticated criminal enterprise can be exposed." The legal proceedings moved quickly. Janet Pierce, faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of multiple witnesses, accepted a plea bargain that would send her to prison for 15 years. More importantly, the investigation had triggered a statewide review of Sunshine Healthcare's operations. Your mother's actions have potentially saved hundreds of elderly residents from financial exploitation, Detective Martinez told Miguel and Rosa. The documentation she helped compile is being used to investigate similar crimes across the state. But the most profound changes were happening within the Martinez family itself. Miguel stood in his mother's room, holding the complete inventory of her hidden fortune, $347,000 in cash, meticulously saved over 3 decades of business operations. "Mama, why didn't you tell us?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "We could have avoided all of this." "Because you needed to learn that asking for help isn't weakness," Dolly replied gently. "And because I needed to prove that getting older doesn't mean becoming helpless." Rosa, who had spent years feeling guilty about her mother's placement in memory care, was struggling with her own revelations. "I should have listened to you. I should have trusted your instincts." "You did exactly what you thought was best for me," Dolly said firmly. "That's what loving children do. But now you know that love and protection aren't the same thing." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Patty Kim, who had requested a meeting with the family. The young nurse looked nervous but determined as she entered the room. "Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to thank you," Patty said, "and to apologize. I suspected something was wrong for months, but I was too afraid to act alone." "You weren't alone," Dolly replied. "You just didn't know it yet. I've been offered a position at a new facility, one with better oversight and genuine commitment to resident care. But I wanted to ask, would you consider staying as a resident advocate? The new administration is looking for someone with your unique qualifications." The offer was tempting, but Dolly had other plans. "I think it's time I went home, but I'll be available to help other families who find themselves in similar situations." Charlie had been quiet throughout the conversation, but now he spoke up. "Abuela, I've been thinking about what you said, about using technology to protect vulnerable people. What if we created a system, a way for families to monitor their loved ones' care and finances in real time?" Quote, "That's a wonderful idea, Mijo. But first you need to find a job that pays well enough to support your idealism." Charlie grinned. "Actually, I got a call today. A tech company in Austin wants to interview me. They're developing elder care monitoring systems, and they heard about our investigation." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Dolly's fight for justice had not only saved her family's home, but had also launched her grandson's career in a field dedicated to protecting the very population she had helped defend. Father Luis arrived for what he announced would be a celebration rather than a pastoral visit. "I've been thinking about what happened here," he said, settling into his familiar chair. "About how assumptions can blind us to reality, and how courage can emerge from the most unexpected places." "What do you mean, Padre?" "I mean that you've reminded all of us that wisdom and strength don't disappear with age. They just take different forms." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "The church has been discussing the need for better advocacy programs for elderly parishioners. Would you be interested in helping us develop something?" Dolly considered the offer. After 30 years of running a business and 3 weeks of running an investigation, the idea of retirement felt both foreign and appealing. But the idea of using her experience to help others felt like a natural extension of everything she had accomplished. "I'd like that, Padre. But first, I want to go home and cook a proper meal for my family." As the legal proceedings continued and the facility underwent its transformation under new management, the Martinez family found themselves changed by their experience. Miguel had learned to accept help without losing his dignity. Rosa had discovered that her mother's competence extended far beyond traditional expectations. And Charlie had found a career path that combined his technological skills with his grandmother's sense of justice. But perhaps the most important change was in their understanding of what it meant to age with dignity. Dolly had proven that vulnerability and strength could coexist, that asking for help and maintaining independence weren't mutually exclusive, and that the most dangerous assumptions were often the ones that seemed most protective. The memory care unit settled into its new routine under reformed management, but the lessons learned from Janet Pierce's crimes would echo far beyond the walls of Sunrise Memory Care. In courtrooms and regulatory offices, In family meetings and policy discussions, the story of an elderly woman who had refused to be silenced would inspire changes that would protect vulnerable people for generations to come. 6 months after Janet Pierce's arrest, the Martinez family home on Elm Street bustled with an energy it hadn't felt in years. The foreclosure notices had been replaced with renovation plans, funded by Dolly's carefully hoarded fortune. But more than the physical improvements, the house radiated the warmth of relationships rebuilt on honest foundations. Dolly stood in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had planned countless quinceañeras and wedding receptions, now transformed into the headquarters of something entirely new. The Martinez Foundation for Elder Justice occupied the converted sunroom, its mission statement framed on the wall: protecting the vulnerable through education, advocacy, and the power of informed families. "Abuela, the reporter from the Austin American-Statesman is here," Charlie called from the living room, where he had set up a temporary office. His new job at Tech Care Solutions had allowed him to work remotely 3 days a week, splitting his time between developing eldercare monitoring software and helping his grandmother manage her foundation. The interview was one of several that had followed the statewide investigation into Sunshine Healthcare. Janet Pierce's conviction had triggered regulatory reforms across Texas, and Dolly had become an unexpected spokesperson for elder advocacy. But she approached media attention with the same strategic thinking she had once applied to catering large events. "Mrs. Martinez, you've become something of a folk hero," the reporter said, settling into the kitchen chair that had become designated for visitors. "How does it feel to know that your actions have led to systemic changes in eldercare oversight?" "It feels like the beginning, not the end," Dolly replied, pouring coffee from the same pot she had used to serve construction workers and wedding planners. "One administrator is in prison, but the system that allowed her to operate is still largely intact. We need to make sure families know what to look for, and we need to make sure they know they have power." The foundation's work had already expanded beyond what anyone had imagined. Ruby Washington had become the chief research coordinator, her civil rights experience proving invaluable in documenting patterns of abuse across multiple facilities. Together, they had created a comprehensive guide for families navigating the complex world of elder care. "The most important thing we've learned," Ruby added, joining the interview from her new apartment in the senior living complex she had chosen after leaving Sunrise, "is that vigilance and love aren't the same thing. Families think they're protecting their loved ones by not asking difficult questions, but real protection comes from staying engaged, asking hard questions, and refusing to accept explanations that don't make sense." The doorbell rang, and Rosa arrived with a stack of legal documents. Her role in the foundation combined her counseling skills with her growing expertise in eldercare law. The guilt she had carried about her mother's placement had transformed into fierce determination to help other families avoid similar situations. "The class action lawsuit against Sunshine Healthcare has been certified," Rosa announced, setting the papers on the kitchen table. 47 families are participating, representing over $600,000 in stolen funds. "What about the residents who don't have family to advocate for them?" Dolly asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter that kept her awake at night. "That's where the state ombudsman program comes in," Rosa replied. "The new legislation requires independent oversight for any resident who doesn't have regular family contact. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Miguel arrived for lunch, his construction clothes replaced by the business casual attire he wore to his new job as a project manager for a company that specialized in accessible housing modifications. The financial security provided by his mother's hidden savings had allowed him to pursue work that aligned with his values, rather than simply paying bills. "How's the retrofit going at Sunrise?" he asked, settling into the chair that had always been his at family gatherings. "Almost finished," Miguel replied. "New security systems, transparent billing software, and common areas designed to encourage family involvement. It's going to be a model for other facilities." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Father Luis, who had become the foundation's spiritual advisor and community liaison. His network of parishes had proved invaluable in identifying families who might be experiencing elder financial abuse. "Dolly, I have news," he said, his expression mixing excitement with concern. "The diocese wants to expand the elder advocacy program statewide. They're asking you to speak at the annual conference in Houston." "How many people?" Dolly asked, already calculating the logistics. 1,200 parish leaders, social workers, and family advocates. Then, we'll need to make sure we have enough materials. Charlie, can you update the presentation with the latest statistics? Charlie looked up from his laptop, where he was simultaneously managing foundation business and working on his employer's new elder care monitoring app. Already on it, Abuela. I've also been working on a mobile app that families can use to track their loved ones' care and finances in real time. The technology component of their advocacy work had exceeded everyone's expectations. Charlie's employer had embraced the elder justice mission, recognizing that transparent monitoring systems could be a competitive advantage in the growing senior care market. The pilot program at 3 facilities has shown remarkable results, Charlie reported. Families using the monitoring system report 90% higher satisfaction rates, and facilities have seen a 60% reduction in complaints about billing irregularities. Because people behave differently when they know they're being watched, Ruby observed with the dry humor that had sustained her through decades of activism. Patricia Kim arrived for the monthly advisory board meeting, having left her position at Sunrise to become the foundation's healthcare policy consultant. Her inside knowledge of facility operations had proved invaluable in developing practical recommendations for reform. The nursing shortage is going to be the next crisis, Patty warned, reviewing data from across the state. Facilities are cutting corners on staffing, and that creates conditions where abuse can flourish. What do you recommend? Dolly asked, already knowing that the answer would require expanding their mission beyond financial crimes. We need to start training family members to recognize signs of inadequate care, not just financial abuse. And we need to create support networks so families don't feel isolated when they have concerns. The afternoon's work session was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Detective Sarah Martinez had called ahead, but her presence still carried the weight of official business. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to give you an update on the Sunshine Healthcare investigation, she said, declining offers of coffee with the efficiency of someone still on duty. Janet Pierce has agreed to cooperate with our investigation into her corporate connections. We're looking at potential racketeering charges against the parent company. What does that mean for the other facilities? Rosa asked. It means we're going to be able to pursue criminal charges against the executives who created the system that allowed Pierce to operate. This isn't just about one administrator anymore. It's about a corporate culture that prioritized profits over the safety of vulnerable residents. The implications were staggering. What had started as one woman's fight to protect her family's home had exposed a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states and involved hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen funds. The Department of Justice has asked if you'd be willing to testify before a congressional subcommittee, Detective Martinez continued. They're drafting federal legislation for elder care oversight. Dolly considered the request. 6 months ago, she had been dismissed as a confused old woman whose family couldn't handle her care. Now she was being asked to help shape national policy. I'll do it, she said simply. But I want Ruby and Charlie to come with me. This isn't just my story. It's our story. As the day wound down and the various meetings concluded, the Martinez family found themselves alone in the kitchen, where their crisis had first become apparent. The foreclosure notices were gone, replaced by thank you letters from families who had been helped by the foundation. The desperate financial calculations had been replaced by strategic planning for sustainable advocacy work. Mama, Miguel said quietly, I owe you an apology. For what? For not seeing who you really were. For thinking that getting older meant getting weaker. For assuming that needing help meant losing your value. Dolly reached across the table and took her son's hand. You saw what I let you see. I was so focused on protecting all of you that I forgot you might be strong enough to protect me too. We're stronger together, Rosa added. All of us. Outside the kitchen window, the East Texas evening was settling into its familiar rhythm. But inside the Martinez home, 3 generations of a family that had almost been torn apart by pride and assumptions were building something new, a legacy of justice that would protect vulnerable people for generations to come. The memory care crisis that had brought them to the brink of disaster had become the foundation for their most important work. And the woman who had been dismissed as confused and dependent had proven that some fights are worth having, some secrets are worth revealing, and some memories are worth preserving at any cost. The morning of Dolly's 79th birthday dawned clear and warm, the kind of East Texas spring day that made everyone believe in new beginnings. The Martinez family home on Elm Street had been transformed for the celebration, its renovated rooms filled with the sounds of 3 generations preparing a feast that would honor both tradition and change. In the kitchen, Dolly worked alongside her granddaughter Elena, Miguel's daughter, who had driven down from college specifically to learn her great-grandmother's tamale recipe. The young woman's hands moved awkwardly at first, struggling with the delicate balance of masa and filling that Dolly had perfected over decades. "Mija, let the masa tell you what it needs," Dolly said gently, guiding Elena's hands. "Cooking is like life. You can't force it, but you can't ignore it either. Is this how you taught Dad and Aunt Rosa?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the curiosity of someone discovering family history. "Your father was too impatient, and your aunt was too precise," Dolly replied with a smile. "But you have the touch. Maybe someday you'll teach your own children." In the living room, Charlie was setting up a display of photographs that documented the past year's extraordinary journey. Images from the Foundation's work, newspaper clippings about the Sunshine Healthcare investigation, and photos from speaking engagements across the state created a visual timeline of transformation. "Abuela, look at this," Charlie called out, holding up a framed photograph. "Remember when that reporter called you an unlikely hero?" "I remember thinking that any hero who was likely wouldn't have been underestimated in the first place," Dolly replied, not looking up from her tamales. The first guests began arriving at noon. Ruby Washington came with her daughter and grandchildren, the same family who had once visited her at Sunrise Memory Care. The difference in Ruby's demeanor was remarkable. Where once she had been watchful and defensive, she now radiated the confidence of someone whose expertise was valued and respected. "How's the advocacy training program going?" Dolly asked as Ruby settled into the chair that had become hers during Foundation meetings. 15 new volunteer advocates trained last month, Ruby reported with satisfaction, and the state ombudsman office wants to expand the program statewide. "Turns out there's a lot of demand for people who know how to recognize and document elder abuse." Patricia Kim arrived with her fiancé, a young doctor who had become involved in healthcare policy reform after learning about their work. Patty's transformation from a nervous nurse afraid to speak up to a confident advocate had been one of the most gratifying aspects of the past year. "The nursing school wants to add a course on elder advocacy to their curriculum," Patty announced, setting a bouquet of flowers on the kitchen counter. "They want me to help develop it." "That's wonderful," Rosa said, emerging from the dining room where she had been arranging place settings. "Teaching the next generation of caregivers to recognize and report abuse." Father Luis arrived with several parishioners whose families had been helped by the Foundation's work. The priest's role had evolved from spiritual advisor to community organizer, his network of parishes becoming a crucial early warning system for identifying vulnerable seniors. "Dolly, I have news," he said, his expression mixing pride with amazement. "The Vatican has asked about our elder advocacy program. They want to implement something similar in Catholic communities worldwide." "The Vatican?" Miguel asked, looking up from the grill where he was preparing carne asada. "Apparently elder abuse is a global problem, and our model of combining family education with community support is getting international attention." Quote, "The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Sarah Martinez, who had become a friend as well as an ally. Her presence at the birthday celebration symbolized the transformation from investigation to ongoing partnership. Mrs. Martinez, I have an update on the federal case," she said, accepting a glass of Rosa's famous agua fresca. "The Department of Justice is moving forward with racketeering charges against Sunshine Healthcare's parent company. Your testimony was crucial in making that possible. What does that mean for other facilities?" Charlie asked, his software developer's mind immediately jumping to systemic implications. "It means that corporate executives who create cultures of abuse will face personal criminal liability. The days of hiding behind corporate structures are ending." As the afternoon progressed, the celebration took on the rhythm of the community events that Dolly had spent decades organizing. Conversations flowed between generations, languages, and professional backgrounds, creating the kind of cross-pollination of ideas that had always been her specialty. Elena presented her great-grandmother with a photo album she had compiled, documenting the family's journey from crisis to advocacy. The images told a story of resilience, discovery, and the power of refusing to accept unacceptable circumstances. "This is for the Foundation's archives," Elena explained, "but also for future generations of our family, so they know what you accomplished." But the most meaningful gift came from an unexpected source. A letter arrived during the celebration, delivered by a courier who had tracked down the address through the Foundation's website. The return address showed it was from a nursing home in Oregon. "Dear Mrs. Martinez," Rosa read aloud to the gathered crowd, "my name is Margaret Chen, and I'm writing to thank you for saving my mother's life. After reading about your work in the news, I investigated my mother's care facility and discovered financial irregularities similar to what you exposed in Texas. Because of your example, I knew what to look for and how to document it. The administrator has been arrested, and my mother's stolen funds have been recovered. But more importantly, my mother now receives the care she deserves. Your courage gave me the courage to act. Thank you for showing us that age is not a barrier to justice." The letter was signed by 12 family members, each adding their own note of gratitude. Similar letters had been arriving for months, creating a paper trail of lives changed by the ripple effects of one woman's refusal to be silenced. As the evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Dolly found herself in the backyard garden where her money had once been hidden. The rose bushes had been replanted, their location now marked with a small plaque that read, "In memory of secrets that needed to be revealed." "Abuela," Charlie said, joining her in the garden, "what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about all the things I thought I knew about getting older," she replied, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I thought it meant becoming invisible, becoming powerless, becoming a burden to the people I loved. And now? Now I know that getting older means becoming more of who you've always been, not less. The courage was always there. The intelligence was always there. The strength was always there. I just had to remember how to use them." The family gathered on the porch as the day gave way to evening, their conversations ranging from foundation business to family gossip to plans for the future. The house that had once been threatened with foreclosure now stood as a testament to the power of family, community, and the refusal to accept injustice. "What's next for the Foundation?" Ruby asked, her activist's mind already moving toward future challenges. "We're going to keep growing," Dolly replied. "Keep learning. Keep fighting for people who need advocates. And we're going to keep proving that the most dangerous assumption is that vulnerable people are powerless people." As the East Texas night settled around them, 3 generations of the Martinez family reflected on a year that had transformed their understanding of aging, dignity, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. The memory care crisis that had brought them to the brink of disaster had become the foundation for their most important work. And the woman who had been dismissed as confused and dependent had proven that some fights are worth having, some secrets are worth revealing, and some memories are worth preserving at any cost. The celebration continued late into the night, filled with laughter, stories, and plans for the future. But the most important legacy was already secure: the knowledge that courage, intelligence, and determination don't diminish with age. They simply find new ways to change the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,